Part of what has kept so many African nations poor is a steady diet of government-to-government aid. So says author Dambisa Moyo in her book, Dead Aid. She discussed the book at the Cato Institute April 3, 2009. This is a segment of a longer event available at cato.org.
And this is a bit of a quip, but somebody did say to me, you know what, maybe we should stop bothering to go and vote for our leaders to become presidents. We should just start voting, one charity versus another. So charity A can provide better health care than charity B, and just completely forget African election systems. And I think it says a lot that people feel that way. Our governments, by and large, do not provide education, do not provide infrastructure. That's being done by the Chinese. Healthcare is being provided by the Gates Foundation. We have security provided by the UN. So the question is, what is the role of the African government? From my vantage point, they are charged with the responsibility of being at the forefront. I shouldn't have to stand here. You should be looking to be here to listen to what the president of Zambia or Rwanda or Kenya has to say about the fact that the continent is spiraling in the wrong direction. Bureaucracy, inflation, debt burden, these are all artifacts of the aid model, very well documented. They are not, aid is not the only source of these type of problems, but again, in the economics literature, it's widely shown that there are linkages between dumping vast sums of money into small economies and what that implies for things like inflation and also the export sector. The problem with bureaucracy, if I may spend a bit of time on this, is that if you think about the American slogan, no taxation without representation, we are now in a very low equilibrium where African governments need not live or die by African taxes. So that means that they actually have disenfranchised Africans. They're not necessarily interested or acting on behalf of Africans. They spend much more time courting donors, listening to NGOs, than listening to their own people. The ensuing bureaucracies are so, they're creaking and they're laden with bureaucracy to the point that many of the entrepreneurs in Africa struggle to actually start their businesses. And the World Bank, again, has written extensively about things like doing business in Africa, how difficult it is. There's some countries it takes 2 years to get a business license and an inordinate number of processes. So one would think that if a government's livelihood and its mere existence depended on the private sector, as it does in many countries such as the United States, the government would actually care to see the private sector develop. We see trade programs. I was just talking today at the IMF about the fact that Africa's trade share of global trade is trending downwards. It's now 2%. It was 4% a few years ago. Very illustrative, again, of the fact that rather than encourage trade on the African continent, governments aren't bothered to try and make the environment more conducive for foreign direct investment. They would rather, and actually they do, rely much more heavily on foreign aid. In the book, I talk about the political vulnerability of an aid model. It seems to me no surprise that in the past 5 months, we've had 4 coups in Africa: Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Mauritania, and just a couple of weeks ago, Madagascar. It also seems no surprise to me that in the 1990s, there were more civil wars in Africa than the rest of the world combined. The state is the main source of capital in these countries, and so these tend to be wars of capture. And yes, there are other wars and other motivations, but by and large, there seems to me to be a clear rationale for the type of political instability that we see that permeates the continent. Let me just say a couple of things about the solutions. The good news is that they're all very obvious. We're very familiar as a society with what China and India have managed to do in 25, 30 years. Moving 300 million people out of poverty is no small feat. And I think particularly given that China was poorer than many African countries just 25, 30 years ago, it makes it all the more remarkable. My recommendations are obvious, and I think fundamentally they point to the idea that Africa is wasting time having these ongoing negotiations about aid, and it needs to be much more infused with the ideas of the free market. Yes, the free market is being challenged, but it's important, just to paraphrase President Obama from his inauguration speech, the free market system is still the best system that we know for delivering wealth. So it may have had its challenges. This is 300 years later, after showing significant improvements. I think the takeaway from what's happened in the credit markets is not to say that we should throw away the free markets. I think we should be much more focused on figuring out how we can regulate them better so we can get the best out of the system. In the book, I talk about trade. I talk about the capital markets. I'll talk about that in a second. I'll talk about foreign direct investment. And I also talk about more micro things like microfinance. All of these are tried and tested. Africa would really just be following on from other examples, not just China and India or Russia and Brazil, but also on the African continent itself. Places like South Africa and Botswana have managed to meaningfully reduce poverty and are on ostensibly the right path. When I look at some of the writing that's been done, particularly since the 1980s, by institutions such as the World Bank and IMF, it's not that their models of economic development do not include the sort of prescriptions that I've just outlined here. They do, but they're just not aggressive enough about implementing them. As I said, I just had lunch today at the IMF, and you could tell from the conversation that there's a general sense that this is a political economy problem, that Africa's stuck in this unfortunate cycle where the incentives are negative. So giving money is an incentive, but it's not couched in ensuring that we get the right outcomes or positive outcomes. African governments are incentivized to take money. The prescriptions I offer here require hard work when it's much easier to pick up the phone and call and get more money from the international institutions. I think also people, having spoken again to people at the IMF, it seems to me that they too are very concerned. They asked me, did I think that the capacity in Africa has improved after 60 years and $1 trillion? I don't feel confident, having spent time with Zambian policymakers, Rwandan policymakers, and policymakers in Nigeria and Kenya. I'm not confident that these governments can actually stand on their own without expert intervention. And this is after billions of dollars have been sent to the continent, and begs the question: what exactly are we doing?
Dambisa Moyo is author of the book Dead Aid. The full book event is available at cato.org.